Hey, howdy, party people. Today we're going to be looking through the most recent blog post that Hytale put out for the hardware requirements. I did the YouTuber thing and recorded like 6 straight minutes of footage with no audio because I didn't even plug my mic in, nor did I put it where it needs to be. So, cool for me. For the Hytale system requirements, we're going to be having a look at this. Keep in mind, I'm not like the tech guy. I understand computers well enough. I can tell you what kind of GPUs mean what. CPUs, Intel numbering system, a little bit different, but, I'm sure I'm not alone in that. But I know a little bit, so we're just going to talk about it, have a quick look at it, and see what it looks like. As we get closer to launch, many players have asked what kind of hardware Hytale requires. Our goal is clear: make the game broadly accessible while still supporting the scale, simulation, and modability that define Hytale. Remember that we're still working on performance improvements. This post outlines what we've tested so far, why certain hardware matters, and the current minimum, recommended, and recording/streamer system requirements. These requirements are based on real in-house benchmarks and will continue to evolve as we optimize the game. You can scroll down to the recommended requirements for a TLDR. Hytale is not a simple game for computers, so we try to explain as much as possible. We are actively working to bring Hytale to Linux and Mac as soon as possible. I know there are a lot of people who are going to be excited to hear that, and as they get into it a little bit later, it's sounding better than it is worse, so hopefully it comes to Linux and Mac so more people can play the game. Okay, so the system requirements here, they're going to be talking about what each benchmark is targeting settings-wise, which is very interesting, of course, so that's going to be important for while we're reading through the actual system requirements. Hytale requires both a 64-bit processor and operating system. For the minimum benchmark, we're looking at targeting 30 FPS at 1080p on a low preset, which is a perfectly playable version of the game. For a game like this, 30 FPS is totally fine. It's not the best it could be, but it's very playable, especially in single player. And as they get into later, multiplayer should actually be easier to run at higher frame rates than a single player would be. So hopefully, if you're playing on low-end hardware, you should really have no issue at all. For the recommended benchmark, we're going to be targeting 60 plus FPS at 1080p on a high preset. This is probably how most people will be playing the game on high, mid-range, and even a lot of low-range computers. Recording/streamer benchmark, we're going to be looking at stable frame rates with high-quality video capture and streaming at 1440p. A lot of people have been kind of surprised by them targeting 1440p, but we're talking about content creation, and if you can get a higher resolution, by all means. But even if a lot of people don't necessarily have 4K monitors, there's definitely a lot of people out there that have 1440p monitors, so never hurts. These categories reflect actual in-house testing across low-end integrated GPUs, mid-range laptops, and high-end recording setups. I think it's really interesting that they're using laptops for the recommended specs, because I think there's going to be a lot of people playing this on laptops and other similar devices like handheld PCs. So using integrated chips for that, really cool idea. Good idea for how to benchmark it. Now for the minimum requirements, which again is 1080p at 30 FPS on low settings. For the operating system, you're looking at 64-bit Windows 10 or Windows 11. Thank God Windows 10 is supported. I am not upgrading. You can't make me. I don't want to. At least not yet. For CPU, Intel Core i5-7500 or equivalent, or AMD Ryzen 3 1200 or equivalent. Again, I can't really tell you what that means, other than I know that that's pretty old. Pretty old. And it's definitely lower than what I have. And what I have is an i7-8700, so yeah, I think I should be okay, even though that CPU actually is kind of old at this point. For RAM, we're going to be looking at single player with dedicated graphics, so that's 8 gigabytes of RAM. Dedicated graphics, if you don't know, that means having a proper separate graphics card rather than one that's integrated into your motherboard. So dedicated graphics cards are usually present in custom-built PCs, or just any kind of PC. A single player with integrated graphics, you're going to want 12 gigabytes of RAM. Nobody really has 12 gigabytes, it's either usually 8 or 16. But integrated graphics cards is more like laptops, phones, Steam Decks, you name it. For multiplayer only, no matter what kind of graphics card you have, they recommend 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is pretty cool to hear. For GPUs, for integrated, you're going to want either an Intel UHD Graphics 620 or better, or an AMD Radeon Vega 6 or better. For dedicated GPUs, you're going to want an NVIDIA GTX 900 series or better, an AMD Radeon 400 series or better, or an Intel Arc A series or better. So I only speak GTX personally. I'm an NVIDIA man. 900 series, that's old enough that if you were to try and find one on eBay, you might actually have trouble because it's that old. That's 3 computers ago for me. Because I used to have a PC with a 10 series, which at the time was fantastic. And then I switched to a laptop with a 30 series once that was outdated. Loved that. And then I switched over to PC last year before, and bought myself a 4070 Super. So I think I might liquefy this game. I'm going to be running this at like 500 frames based on that. So 900 series, super agreeable requirement for minimum specs. That sounds awesome. That's really reassuring. But notably though, this game is not GPU bound, it is CPU bound. If you don't know what that means that upgrading your GPU does not matter as much as upgrading your CPU. This game is really CPU intensive, but the graphics fairly easy to render on most graphics cards. Yes, it's good that the graphics card requirements are low, but bear in mind you're going to want a good CPU, and if you haven't heard, RAM has gotten very expensive recently, just in the past few weeks. It has just absolutely blown up, which is terrible to see because it's obviously super important, and the last couple of years you've really seen a lot of reasons to upgrade from 8 to 16 to especially to 32. I would say 30. If I was building a computer right now, I'd want 32 gigs of RAM, but it's looking more and more difficult to actually get that for a reasonable price. So just bear that in mind if you're trying to upgrade your computer in time for Hytale. You should care more about your CPU and RAM than your graphics card. Note, a graphics card with up-to-date drivers supporting at least OpenGL 4.1 is required. Future versions of Hytale may additionally require support for Vulkan 1.3 and DirectX 12. Storage. SATA SSD with 20 gigabytes of free space. They mentioned later the game actually only occupies 8 gigabytes of space, but of course they want you to have more space free, because if your hard drive is literally full up to the last gigabyte, it will not run anything well at all. Your computer will slow down dramatically. It needs a little bit of empty space. As for network, they recommend 2 megabits per second connection for multiplayer. That's super easy to get for most people, I think, but if you want a good Hytale experience and your computer isn't wired into Ethernet, trust me, it is not as hard as you think, and it is completely worth it. Or at the very least, buy yourself a nice Ubiquiti device, get yourself some Wi-Fi 6 going. You will have the time of your life. Of course, if your provider and your current router support it anyway. And the minimum requirements are based on benchmarks where Intel HD Graphics 630 achieved 30 to 34 FPS at 1080p. We definitely recommend setting the view distance to 192 blocks. Ensure that no other programs are running to guarantee performance. Again, with a CPU and RAM intensive thing, you do not want a bunch of browser windows and Discord and whatever else open. It's going to hammer this game and it's going to make it run like crap if you don't have very good CPU or RAM. But they do also talk about the view distance here. You would want to set it to 192 under these kinds of hardware settings. So just bear that in mind. That's half of what they recommend for the view distance. That's half of what the game is designed around, but definitely still totally playable like that. Okay, then we get into the recommended requirements. For the operating system, again, 64-bit Windows 10 or Windows 11. For the CPU, Intel Core i5-10400 or equivalent. Or the AMD Ryzen 5 3600 or equivalent. Here's where you're kind of losing me. I have no idea what that means in Intel or AMD, but from what I've heard, pretty reasonable, pretty easy to attain. RAM, 16 gigabytes, which I think most people that have a gaming PC, you probably already have 16 gigabytes. By the way, if you don't know what's in your computer, and this is super basic stuff, I apologize for anybody that already knows this, but if you don't know what's in your computer, just hit the Windows key, type system information. It should bring most of that stats right up for you. So if you aren't sure what you have or if it's good enough, you can look those settings up and you can go ask your tech buddies and compare to what they say on here and see whether or not you've got a good rig for this, which, trust me, 99 times out of 100, you probably do. For GPU, for integrated ones, Intel Iris Xe graphics are better, AMD Radeon 660M are better. For dedicated, again, NVIDIA GTX 900 series are better, AMD Radeon 400 series are better, or Intel Arc A series are better. Again, the 900 series, super old, so if you have, a 20 series or a 30 series or even a 50 series, you're going to have no problem with GPU. As far as storage goes, this time it's an NVMe SSD with 20 gigabytes of free space. As far as network goes, they recommend 8 megabits per second connection for multiplayer, which, again, a lot of people probably have. This might hold some people back if you're going to be big on multiplayer, but, a lot of people probably are just going to be playing single player, so if that's you, don't worry about it. Okay, and then next we get to storage requirements. Hytale procedurally generates a world that can, in practice, grow without a fixed limit. Based on extensive playtime and exploration mode, we found these numbers to be representative of a normal playthrough. Keep in mind, the more you explore, customize, and build with a wide variety of blocks, the more memory and storage the game will require. Installation size is 8 gigabytes. It's quite small. Save game size in exploration mode is around 661 megabytes for 5,000 by 5,000 blocks, and 27 kilobytes per 32 by 32 chunk. We recommend at least 10 gigabytes of available storage, with 20 gigabytes being a safe bet to enjoy the game for a long duration. An SSD is strongly recommended. If you don't have an SSD, get one. Trust me, it's a game changer. You want an SSD. And also, they're pretty affordable now compared to where they used to be. I mean, I know they're not going to be for everybody, but if you can get an SSD, get one. Trust me, you'll love it. Next up, we have network requirements. Hytale has to be downloaded from the internet, as we do not offer physical sales. Once downloaded, you can always play single player in offline mode. This is huge. You know, it probably shouldn't be, but being able to play a game without a connection to the internet, becoming more and more rare. But thankfully, again, Hytale's an indie game. I do wonder if this would have been different if it did end up releasing under Riot. But yeah, you know, I mean, that's super good to hear. Notably, I think the only reason they really mentioned that it has to be downloaded is they don't have a physical version. You know, there's a lot of people that might be, say, deployed for the military, and they don't really have a regular internet connection. But thankfully, the game is pretty small, so hopefully, you know, folks in positions like that are able to slowly download it over time and hopefully get their hands on the game. For multiplayer, the network requirements mostly depend on your view distance. You will download a lot more data than uploading. Your upload speed is generally irrelevant and very small, less than 250 kilobytes per second. That's, you know, that's nothing, basically. And a lot of people do have low upload speeds, so good, you know? We have tested an exploration mode server and created a worst case scenario by traveling at 1.5 times speed to keep loading new world data faster than the player could. So for a view distance of 192 blocks, you'd want minimum 2 megabits per second, or recommended 4 megabits per second. For a view distance of 384 blocks, which is again what they usually recommend, what they design the game around, you're going to want a minimum of 4.5 megabits per second, or recommended 7 megabits per second. For a view distance of 480 blocks, you're going to want a minimum of 6 megabits per second, and recommended of 10 megabits per second. That's, you know, around 6 to 10 is pretty average for a download speed on Wi-Fi. If you're wired, hopefully you have a lot more than that. I, for example, have, you know, 200 some odd megabits per second. So again, highly recommend getting an Ethernet cord and wiring up your computer as an upgrade for Hytale if you're going to play any multiplayer at all, if you want to play with your friends. Especially if you have a low-end computer and you're like, well, I'm stuck playing mostly multiplayer because I can't upgrade yet, but I have enough money to get an Ethernet, you know, cord. I would definitely recommend doing that. Keep in mind these numbers are worst case scenarios. If you play normally in an exploration mode server while mining, crafting, and exploring, you will not consume nearly as much bandwidth and should even have playable experiences at 1 megabit per second ADSL connections at lower view distances. Especially playing minigames such as Sky Wars, Bed Wars, or other minigames with small maps will result in very low bandwidth usage, which is good because a lot of people don't have access to good internet. You know, there's a lot of countries out there where, you know, people love to game. There's a lot of gamers, but they just don't necessarily have very good internet. So hearing that this is a worst case scenario is probably very reassuring for a lot of you out there. All right, next we get into the recording/streamer requirements. This is the last benchmark. This is targeting 1440p at 60 FPS on high settings. For players who want to record, stream, or produce Hytale content with stable frame rates during high bitrate capture, the goal here is not raw FPS, but consistent frame time under heavy load. Large battles, complex builds, high view distance, simultaneous server simulation if in single player. So this is a little bit different than what you want out of just high-end single-player performance, but definitely this hardware is probably a close match. Okay, the suggested setup for streaming or recording is operating system 64-bit Windows 10 or Windows 11, same as usual. CPU Intel Core i7-10700K or equivalent, or an AMD Ryzen 7 3800X or equivalent. RAM 32 gigabytes. For GPU, you're looking at the NVIDIA RTX 30 series, an AMD Radeon RX 7000 series, or an Intel Arc A series, so they're not really looking at integrated chips for this one. There's also a note. These recommendations are made as newer graphics cards provide much better video quality for a given bitrate, especially for live streaming scenarios. If supported, we also strongly recommend the use of AV1/HEVC for video recording. And then for storage, NVMe SSD with at least 10% or 50 gigabytes of free space available. And there's also a note, for best performance, we recommend using a separate drive for video recording. That makes a lot of sense given read-write speed. One internal benchmark with an AMD Ryzen 9 9950X3D, an NVIDIA RTX 5080, and two 32GB DDR5 6000 RAM sticks sustained around 400 FPS at 3840 by 1440 resolution with view distance set to 768 blocks in single player while recording the game in AV1. This tier is optional, but helpful for creators who want stable 60 plus FPS at high resolutions during recording sessions. Obviously, the benchmark we're talking about there with 400 FPS, that's very high-end hardware. That's top of the line. Most of you probably do not have that. They're talking about 64 gigs of RAM and a 5080. That's very high-end. That would be an expensive unit if you were to build that right now, especially given the way RAM looks. So it's exciting to hear, but just bear in mind that is very high-end hardware. For GPU for recording, they recommend 30 series or better. It's good news for me. I got a 4070 Super. So, there's probably a good number of you out there that have 20 and 30 series. So I think you're going to be able to run this probably at 60 frames with high settings, no problem. If you're recording, maybe you lower the settings a little bit, you'll probably still get frames. You'll probably still get frame rates, You'll probably still get stable frame rates. How Hytale uses your hardware. Hytale runs both a client and a server. Depending on how you play, your hardware requirements change. So for single player, it is the most demanding scenario. Your machine runs the full game client, rendering UI and gameplay, and the entire simulation on the server, NPCs, world generation / updates, and a networking layer. This increases CPU and RAM usage compared to multiplayer. Generally, the server, or single player, requires more CPU performance due to NPCs, world generation, and voxel logic running on your computer. So if you know anything about Minecraft, you know that as the game has gotten more complicated and there's more elements to the simulation, the performance has absolutely tanked, and it hasn't really been optimized very well. This is for both Java and Bedrock, but especially Bedrock. In multiplayer, the server runs remotely. Your PC only handles graphics and gameplay, which typically results in better performance on the same hardware. If you intend to play only multiplayer / minigames, you may be able to use less than the requirements listed below. I assume they mean listed above, because most of the system requirements were above here, but I might be confused. As far as mods go, they will increase requirements, obviously. Large content packs, complex server logic, or extended view distances can push both the CPU and GPU harder than in the baseline game. So they're kind of just covering their ass here, saying, hey, if you mod the game, it's not on us if it runs worse on the same hardware, Now they're going to talk about view distance. This is super important to a voxel game, as you probably know if you've been playing Minecraft for a long time, like a lot of us have. The most impactful performance option is called view distance. This is the radius around the player that is visible, loaded, and simulated around the player. The major problem of view distance is that every time you double the view distance, e.g. 192 to 384, you quadruple the amount of world around you. This means that you have 4 times as many blocks and NPCs, which are causing your computer to work harder. Basically meaning that as you increase the radius, you're not just increasing it for the amount further out it is, but that amount around in actual surface area. And since, the amount you can see is tied to the amount that is simulated, it has a pretty significant impact on your performance based on what kind of hardware you have. We recommend that you experience Hytale with a view distance of 384 blocks. We designed Orbis around this distance, but if that is not enough for you, you may want to spend some time dialing in the ideal view distance for your own computer. Next, they have some visuals, basically just kind of giving you an idea of what these distances actually look like. So first we have a screenshot of 192 view distance from above. So that looks something like this. It's a pretty good amount of distance. I mean, you can see there's quite a bit of detail in there. It's still not bad at all. If you were playing Minecraft like this, you wouldn't be having a bad time. It would be completely playable. You just might have some difficulty if you stray a little bit too far away from your main home, and your crops don't grow quite as frequently as you would hope. But otherwise, perfectly fine, perfectly playable. Next, you have a view distance of 384 blocks. Again, this is how the game was meant to be experienced. This looks super sufficient. This looks pretty long. I think you'll have a great time with this, and it'll look perfectly fine, and as well as keeping you fairly immersed. Yeah, I think this looks great. I think this looks very good. I find it interesting that they're using Zone 2 for this, but I think it's also a good idea because you can clearly see the level of detail in the terrain mapping of the sand. Then you have another example of 192 blocks. This is in Zone 1. It looks very nice here, I think. Something I find interesting about Hytale that nobody really talks about is how a lot of the areas in Zone 1, you just see grass and not as much dirt. You don't really see the dirt poking underneath every single bit of the terrain that goes up, which I think is interesting. I'm wondering if it looks similarly with the World Gen V2, But it looks totally fine. It keeps the game nice and vibrant and colorful, which is something I really miss from Minecraft. So I think it looks nice, and this is a perfectly fine view distance. You could definitely see your entire build, whatever it might be, unless you're building something really crazy, and even then, it's just gonna look even cooler because it's like, wow, my build is so big, it doesn't even fit into my render distance. Like, that's cool, you know? So I think this is perfectly fine. Here's another example of 384 block render distance. This is, the recommended amount, and I think this is great. This, this shows you the whole clearing pretty much, and a little bit of what's on the outskirts of it. So I think this looks fine. Here's where you start getting into the really cool looking stuff. This is 768 block render distance. You can see there's some kind of like mage tower off in the distance. You can see a little bit of the tree line back here, and then a lot of it over here. This looks awesome. This might be how I play it. I don't know. A lot of people prefer kind of a medium render distance for the sake of immersion, but this just looks really nice, doesn't it? So, seeing as I can probably run it at any render distance I want, pretty much, I might have to run it at this. This looks nice. So this is 1024 block render distance. So you can see the tree line a lot more clearly back there, which, still looks super nice. But you can also see this this mountain range back here with some atmospheric perspective applied to it. So I think, that's an important detail, is that if you have a really long render distance, yeah, you might not be as immersed per se, but you might be even more immersed because it looks like it fits naturally into the horizon. Atmospheric perspective, if you don't know, is when something is really far away and really large, like these mountains here, it gets kind of a blue haze over it. And it looks gorgeous. It looks absolutely gorgeous. Then you have technical notes. This section is very technical, and it is not expected that players understand this, but it may help a technical friend / community member help you determine if your computer / laptop is sufficient. Hytale is a sandbox voxel game, which means it cares more about CPU performance and RAM than many other games. Once your GPU meets our minimum specs, upgrading your CPU and having enough system memory will usually help more than buying an even faster graphics card. This is what I was talking about earlier with it being CPU bound. Internally, Hytale builds large texture atlases, big combined textures, and keeps a lot of world geometry in VRAM. Higher view distances increase this usage. That's why some GPUs run out of VRAM or start stuttering even if they look fine on paper. As a rule of thumb, make sure your GPU meets or exceeds our listed minimums, including VRAM. Prefer a dedicated, discrete GPU over an integrated one on laptops or any kind of handheld PC. After that, focus on a solid multi-core CPU and enough RAM rather than a top-end GPU. So I think if you have, say, a 10 series or a 20 series and you've been meaning to upgrade, that's fine, do that, but if you're worried about Hytale, you might want to look more at your CPU and RAM. I think as long as you have a 10 series, or really if you have a 20 series or above, you don't really need to worry about your GPU with this game. You might need it for other games, so if you're upgrading everything, if you've got that kind of money, knock yourself out, but you should look at your CPU more and try to understand where you stand compared to the requirements. Our optimization work is ongoing. We have not finished optimizing Hytale. Graphics, world simulation, memory behavior, GPU, overhead, and more are still being tuned. Expect performance to improve further as we progress through early access and beyond. Our mission is to continuously improve the performance of Hytale. I think this is an important note. It sounds like the game is running great so far. Most of the stuff that makes it sort of rough in early access is really just bugs and crashes. This bit is important, it sounds like the game is running great so far, and it's only going to get better. I think most of the stuff that makes this game kind of rough and what makes it early access is just bugs and crashes, from what Simon has said. But as far as performance goes, it sounds pretty good so far. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to improve. Slikey and the team will not rest until you can play this on a smart fridge. He hasn't said that, but it's what it sounds like. What to expect next? We are still working on the system requirements for Mac and Linux, which we intend to support for older Macs, Intel processors, and newer Macs with M1 Plus, Apple processors. We will update this post as we receive more data. That's cool to hear that they're going to go back and change this post, because a lot of people are going to be finding this, once they have made those changes. We received a lot of inquiries about the Steam Deck, and we also lack the ability to test it right now, and we don't plan to launch on Steam until we determine our ability to comply with Steam's policies. On paper, it should work on Steam Deck, but we also lack good input mapping / small display UI, so we will once again ask for some patience. These requirements will be updated as we apply optimizations through early access. Our focus is to make Hytale run well across a wide variety of systems without compromising scale or modability. If you have a computer that doesn't run single player very well, you should join a friend and play with them on their single player, or play on online servers as they show better performance. That's a really cool note, a lot of these are. First off, Mac and Linux sound closer than we thought, probably within the first year of early access, if not sooner than that. It sounds like there's a chance it might be available at launch for early access, but not to get your hopes up too high. I believe he might have said that in a tweet, as I didn't see it in this post, but I know I saw it somewhere. If you don't know, Steam Decks use SteamOS, which is like a fork or a branch of Linux. I don't fully understand this stuff, but if they can get it working on Linux, chances look good for Steam Deck. The only problem is they would have to probably put it on Steam in order for it to be officially supported on SteamOS. That being said, it's possible you might be able to run it unofficially. It wouldn't be perfect, you would have probably some performance issues, probably some crashes if you could get it running at all. You wouldn't have necessarily Steam's controller support. But I think notably, since I'm talking about input mappings and small display UI, you could always have a Steam Deck and then plug it into a TV and then attach a USB keyboard and mouse, or even Bluetooth, and you could have pretty much a normal Hytale experience. Just keep in mind that the Steam Deck is kind of outdated. It would probably be fine for running this at like medium settings, but I don't know if you'd be able to push high settings with a Steam Deck. That being said, if you have a different handheld like a Lenovo Legion Go S or something similar, you probably wouldn't have any trouble. A lot of those are Windows-based, though they have been rolling out SteamOS-based ones. The Windows-based ones, I'm curious to see if people would be able to get the game running on there. I think it's also cool that they're considering modability in the system requirements and in optimizing the game. Obviously, if you've ever played Minecraft Java with like 300 plus mods, you can spend an hour waiting for it to boot up, and once you finally get in, you're gonna have to spin around 400 times to render everything enough that it actually moves smoothly. It's kind of miserable sometimes. Of course, you don't have to play with 300 mods. Nobody's making you. But this game might be able to handle large mod packs a lot better from the sounds of it, because it's a huge focus of the team. They also mentioned, of course, there that you can just connect to a friend if your single player doesn't run very well. But to be honest, if you're that close to the line, make it a priority to upgrade, if you can afford to. If not, it's cool that, you could just connect to a friend and play it that way, and you might have a better time as long as your internet connection's all right. And from the sounds of it, it doesn't have to be that good. So that sounds really cool. Overall, the system requirements for Hytale look super reasonable. I'm sure a lot of us won't really have any trouble meeting them. I'm super excited to see how this game runs. I'm trying to think of upgrades I can get for my computer other than components, because I don't have a lot of money right now. I'm thinking about maybe upgrading my monitor or buying a handheld like the Lenovo Legion Go, but of course we don't know if it'll be able to run on there. But I also don't know how I feel about ultra-wide monitors, but I'm trying to think, honestly right now I'm just thinking I might upgrade my mouse mat. This thing's kind of dinged up, so who knows? May I'll come up with something, but as it is, doesn't really sound like I have to upgrade any components to run this game very well, which is good to hear. And hopefully a lot of you are in the same position. For anybody that doesn't sound great for the hardware requirements, I am sorry to hear that. I can't imagine there's a lot of you, which probably doesn't make it feel any better. But, in due time, I'm sure. In due time. Thank you guys for hanging out with me, and this was pretty interesting to go through. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked the video. I'm trying to get more content out to you guys. Should have some more videos out soon. I would also like to give a shout out to this collaboration I was in with Chimkin Fingers, another Hytale creator, very promising guy, very cool guy. He's doing 12 days until pre-orders, the 12 days of Hytale, where every day he interviews somebody, a fellow Hytale creator, be it a content creator or a mod creator, and just kind of talks to them about their perspective on the game, ask them some cool questions, and I would recommend, my episode is already up as of today, so, and there's 2 other episodes out. Highly recommend them. Go give him a watch. It's a lot of fun. He's a super cool dude. If you like my videos, you'll love his, so go give him a watch, go give him some love, and I will catch you guys in the next one.